reading the stories of your mom,
Yeah.
understanding the complicated world that she existed in,
Yes.
but then wondering, like how you see her. Like, did you forgive her? Were you able to let it all go? Do you still hold some of those feelings? Like, what has your journey been?
Oh my God, what a big, good question. That's such a deep, like, this is what I spent 10 years in therapy to be able to now say on the Daily Show. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you initially, you're speaking of kind of the humor, and I do think it's a great coping mechanism, and I try not to use it as a defense mechanism. I used it that way for a long time initially when I was first kind of trying to grapple with everything, and I think that led to really unfunny choices, and my sense of humor is just sort of overcompensatory and kind of flailing and obnoxious, to be honest. But I think finding humor in those really intense moments and that those tragedies can bring levity where it's necessary. I hope I've done that. With my mom, I haven't gotten to a place of forgiveness, and I was trying to get to a place of forgiveness for so long. In therapy, I would sort of plead almost with my therapist of like, why am I not able to get to this place? What's wrong with me that I'm not able to forgive my mom for this abuse? Why am I so terrible that I can't get to that place? And she eventually said, Jennette, what if you just kind of dropped forgiveness and didn't make that your goal? Because that's you still trying to do your mom's work. I couldn't, yeah, right?
To piggyback off of my last episode, talking about the differences between Disney and Nickelodeon stars, I mentioned a star from Nickelodeon who talked about her own experiences growing up in the public eye, and it was Jennette McCurdy. And this is another very long overdue episode. I've been trying to work on it on and off for about 2 years, while I was creating the podcast in general. That's when I started writing an outline, attempting to write an outline based off of Jennette McCurdy, because she is an actress that we grew up with, if you're watching Nickelodeon, that truly kind of shocked us the most, who brought us the most laughs and was very iconic, in my opinion, in her time, when she was in the business. She still is, but when she was acting. Her story is a very relatable one that so many people go through. I sort of even went through myself, and I wanted to just simply do a whole deep dive, even though there's plenty of videos that have some that do deep dive into her life ever since she released her memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died. But I wanted to just simply do it myself too. I want to join in the conversation, because for years we've known her as the spunky, sarcastic, and street tough Sam Puckett on iCarly and Sam and Cat. But at the time, she was going through the darkest period of her own life. And what really amazed me the most, and I thought about it the other day, was the fact that Jennette McCurdy really is such a damn good actress, because not only was she acting on screen, she had to come home and just continue on acting. So we're going to be doing a deep dive, talking about Jennette McCurdy's life. Without further ado, welcome back to the Let's Discuss podcast. I'm your host, Nick Marshall, and I basically just simply talk about whatever I want. Let's get into it. So first up is her childhood. So Jennette McCurdy was born June 26, 1992, to mother Deborah McCurdy and Andy Martin. She has 3 brothers, Marcus, Dustin, and Scotty, and she lived with her grandparents in Los Angeles, California. The family was always struggling with money and also Deborah's health, because she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. This was probably before Jennette was born, and she also developed a hoarder hobby and just filled their house with random things, so the house was almost unlivable because there was just so much shit laying around the house. But she just said they were for memories and memories purposes, whatever. But like Deborah always brought up her cancer, and I think she mentioned it early on in the book. So I may or may not be wrong, but she showed slideshows of it to her kids, and she also fought a lot with Jennette's father, often throwing him out of the house and breaking glasses, and screaming at the top of her lungs, basically like scaring her children when these things happen. Jennette also grew up Mormon, so basically that kind of like explains like most of her trauma, but like not really a whole lot because it was from her mother, Deborah. And that kind of like segues into her relationship with her mother. Because Deborah wanted Jennette to live out her dream of being an actress, and she saw Jennette as a pawn, and also she was her best friend at the same time. It put her in a position where she constantly had to take care of her mother's needs and watch out for her moods. All the time, Jennette was kind of like constantly on edge. She can always pinpoint Deborah's moods and how she like needs to like watch out and like calm her down, because when she gets into a very like rage mood, it becomes scary and hysterical. When she becomes hysterical, it becomes very scary, and she tries to like not let her get to that point. Unfortunately, she wasn't always very successful in avoiding her mother becoming hysterical, as she wrote in her book. Deborah taught Jet how to have an eating disorder when she started to develop breast. And she even showered her until she was 16, and did quote-unquote exams on her. All these described in the book were very messed up in a lot of ways, because it was physical abuse, it was psychological abuse, sexual abuse. It was all very messed up. And they also had a very codependent relationship. Deborah constantly controlling Jennette, making her feel like she's lost without her. Deborah is also a very complex woman, and Jennette did do a good job in trying to like write out her mother as very human as possible, while also acknowledging the fact that like what Deborah is doing is toxic and abusive to her. But also what kind of like impressed me the most about reading this book was the fact that like it almost reads as like a diary. We're seeing like an evolution of her actual thoughts that she had at the time. We're seeing an evolution of her actual thought process throughout the years, so we can understand what she was going through and also what she was thinking about at the time and how she viewed situations with her mother. She also kind of like gives the book a sort of like dark humor, because if it's like all trauma, then people would not read her book. And then what gets me the most is that this book is like a very edited and finalized version of like what she was comfortable with talking about. And also there's probably like more things that have happened. Obviously there are obviously more things, but like she probably didn't feel comfortable sharing it with the world. So that kind of like unsells you the most with it. The next thing is like her eating disorder. Now, I mentioned the fact that she taught her how to have an eating disorder, and this continued throughout her life, because Jennette suffered from eating disorders basically her entire childhood, her teenage years, and most of her 20s. And it started off with like the reason why like her mother taught her to have an eating disorder is because, like I said, when she saw that she was starting to develop breast, and the concern she was having is because she was a child actor, and in order for her to keep booking roles as a child actress was for her to keep looking younger. When she was booking jobs, her mother was able to like pay bills. She wasn't able to like get more extended days when like the power went out or the water went out. Like she was able to just like pay everything on time. And it also meant like extra money for this, extra money for that. It provided like a little bit of like financial stability. And obviously parents who want to control their kids and the child in show business, stage parents basically, they will use their kids for money because they see it as like a way out. So her mother started teaching her how to have an eating disorder. It started off with like calorie restriction, which was like 1,000 which was a 1,000 calorie diet. But then she ate like half her portions and then came constantly like weighing herself like 5 times a day. And the more she did, the more she shrank. And her mom taught her everything she knew because she's been doing the same thing for years. Her mother talked about like overhearing her parents say something about how she was getting bigger and how that stuck with her. So she's been doing calorie restriction for years. Her mother, I don't know. I don't know if that. I don't know. I'm not gonna go that deep into it because that's Deborah's experience. I don't know her, so I have my opinions on the woman, but like I'm not gonna invalidate her feelings. Anyway. So because she's been doing this for years, it's only so natural when her daughter is so scared of her like them like going broke because she's growing up, she's gonna teach it to her. And this has been like a toxic pattern for like years and years. It got into the point where she was like so small, she still had to sit in a booster seat. And when she booked iCarly, it got worse when she got her period at 16, and then she took it far and like developed bulimia, and she started like overeating and then like throwing up, and it got more progressively like worse and like made her like have more stomach aches, or it ruined her dental health for a minute. It like it made her she had like, I think she says she had like constant sore throats. She did this all to like feel numb after her mother's death, and she also started like abusing alcohol. She was using like a lot of vices, and like her eating disorder was like the biggest vice of all because it distracted her from everything. It also like kept her from booking roles, and like the worst part is like everyone kept commenting on her body all the time. The people on set on Sam and Cat saying how like nice her butt is, or like people like making very like uncomfortable like comments. Like it was all just, especially again when you're a child actor growing up on set, your image becomes like everything, not just how like the public perceives you, which it plays a whole factor into the longevity of your career if like public opinion comes into court the most sometimes, but also like how your image can be like marketable to like shows, like your physical appearance, like how can you like market yourself, or like how can networks market you for characters, for roles? What type do you fit into? Or are you more like for example, like are you more like shy, like nerdy type, or are you like the sexy character who's overly confident? These boxes that like you're going to be like put into, like especially like when you're a child, like you're branding yourself not on just on screen but in real life. And even worse, when you're on Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, your youth and likeness is like captured forever on a screen, and then people think that like that's how you are in real life. And that's what's been happening to Jennette. And that's, again, like hearing those things and having those things like sink into you like every single day and internalizing it, it wasn't really like helping with the eating disorder because of the fact that simply how we view child stars in general, especially female child stars. We can talk about male child stars like in another episode, but like especially like, with like female child actresses, like branding yourself, like having like people brand you at a young age and saying that your looks matter the most and how you're perceived the most by the public matters the most, in order for you to have like your livelihood is dependent on how like people, on what people think of you and how you look. That can be very stressful, which is what caused her eating disorder the most. But now we can say that as of like 2025, and obviously like years, like I think like in the last few years, like she says that she's fully recovered from eating disorder. She hasn't thrown up, she hasn't constantly weighed herself in years. And that's the best news ever. That's like a very like comforting thing to look forward to when you're like in recovery. Even though like she mentioned like saying like people in the eating disorder communities have said like like being cured shouldn't be like the main goal because it might discourage people.
I've been eating disorder free for years at this point. And when I say eating disorder free, I mean, I consider myself recovered. This is kind of a controversial statement in the eating disorder community. They really like to use the word like recovery. Like we're always in recovery from an eating disorder. We're never recovered. We're always in recovery because it's something we always have to maintain and work on. And I find that language so frustrating, unhelpful, unmotivating. It kind of makes me angry. If you're struggling with an eating disorder, like, and you hear, oh, you're going to always have to be working on this for the rest of your life. That seems like I felt hopeless when people were using that kind of language. So I feel it is important, because it is true, to let you guys know that I'm recovered. I'm hopeful that that's in some ways, heartening to you and gives you some sense of hope if you're struggling right now that you can be recovered.
It's good news that she says that she's fully recovered and that she has a better relationship with food. Let's talk about iCarly, the Dan Snyder of it all. Okay, this is where I'm going to be sprinkling in allegedly, because I'm not sure if there was like any legal actions taken and actual like conviction of him. So all this has to be quote unquote alleged because I don't have the money. Jennette writes about her interactions with the creator on iCarly. And in her book, she wrote 3 separate instances where he was being abusive, weird, and just simply creepy. She describes Dan as a person who's she always describes the creator as a person who always knows what to say to bar you up and then make things fun. But also he knows how to tear you down to pieces, and she's been on both ends of his wrath. Like every other person who's worked for him at Nickelodeon, allegedly. She's written about the time he gave her alcohol when she was 18 and gave her a shoulder massage. She didn't like it, but she couldn't refuse because she didn't want him to get angry and fire her, allegedly. And she also wrote about how terrible her first kiss was and how sort of threatening Dan was and was yelling on set, allegedly. These are just some of the things that like made it sort of like traumatizing to work on the show. And also like add in the fact that like her character Sam was like, if you like watch iCarly, you know like Sam is like a huge like eater. And obviously like those scenes were probably like very hard for Jennette because that's where the real acting comes in. Like Sam just being a huge eater, her eating disorder wasn't like at the darkest point, but like it was still concerning. She was still at the height of her eating disorder when she was playing Sam. Also, she met her best friend Miranda Cosgrove. They became like best friends on set.
On set, Miranda said cuss words like shit and ass, and she took the Lord's name in vain at least 50 times a day. Mom warned me not to get too close to Miranda because she doesn't believe in God. Nathan is okay for me to get close to, Mom says, because he does. Even though Mom said not to get close to Miranda, I really wanted to. I wanted some of her coolness to rub off on me. And she seems nice too, which is hard to be if you're cool. I had my fingers crossed that somehow, despite our mutual shyness, a friendship between us would develop. But then, unfortunately, it didn't seem likely. Each day that passed where we didn't exchange phone numbers, I felt like we were getting further away from a potential friendship. Until, on the last day of shooting the pilot, just as Miranda was leaving set, she turned back and said, "Hey, Jennette, do you have aim?" "Not really," I said, thinking she was talking about throwing things. I've never had good aim. "You don't have AOL Instant Messenger?" She seemed shocked. "Oh, aim?" On set, Miranda said cuss words like shit.
Next, we're talking about Sam and Cat. It was originally pitched to Jennette when she had lunch with the creator, and he was talking about how he was creating a show just for her, Just Puckett. But instead, we had Sam and Cat, and the original like premise for Just Puckett, it was going to be like Sam becoming a school counselor, and it seemed like sort of interesting. Like I think it would have been like taking place like I think it would have been like taking like place like a few years like later, like in her adult years. But like obviously like when she learned that like they were doing like Sam and Cat instead, and she was gonna be like, and it wasn't gonna be anything what she was talked about. It wasn't gonna be anything what was pitched to her. She was obviously like very disappointed. And this show became the catalyst for her mental health, like for a lot of things, but like two things really. She was grieving the loss of her mom, and then the people on set were starting to play favorites between her and Ariana Grande. And also, this is where her eating disorder became even worse because she started like binging. That's when she started binging. And then like there was also an instance on the show where she was promised that she was going to direct an episode, and she was looking forward to it for weeks and weeks and weeks. But she wasn't going to be able to like direct an episode. She learned that at the table read. And it threw her off for the rest of the day. And one of the producers on the show went to her trailer, or went to her dressing room, because she was in her dressing room, and she was upset. And they told her that someone big on set was so adamant on her not on her on not was so against her directing the episode that they threatened to like leave set. And I don't know about you, but I feel like it was Ariana that said that, because who else was big enough on set? Like, if it wasn't a side character, it was not a side character who threatened to walk out. Because if a side character walked out of the show, it wouldn't really be the end of the show. I feel like Ariana like was against Jennette directing an episode. Jennette doesn't even know either. She was just said someone who works on the show was so against her directing an episode that they threatened to walk out. And it was such a good threat that they just simply complied. Her work nowadays. She quit acting in 2017 to pursue writing full-time. She wrote and directed a few short films such as like Kenny and Strong Independent Woman, which explored themes of like family dysfunction and childhood and disillusionment. She worked for the Wall Street Journal. She wrote and starred in her own series, What's Next for Sarah. It's on YouTube. I feel like y'all seen it, but like obviously like, go and watch it. I recommend. It's pretty good. She had put on a one-woman show of the same name. She had put on a one-woman show of the same name of the book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. She's also hosted 2 podcasts in the span of like 5 years. Yeah, since 2020, she released the podcast Empty Inside, which she brought on people during the quarantine, and she like had like interviews, and I think it's still on YouTube, so I feel like we can like search it up and like watch it. I feel like it's still on YouTube. And then the podcast Hard Feelings in 2023 she launched with Lemonada. And listening to like Hard Feelings made me understand Jennette a little bit more. She gave us like a little bit more into the reality of like healing from trauma, and how it's like never like truly like linear. Like particularly like in the first episode, Bad Mood, I feel like it was a good chance for people who watched iCarly and Sam and Cat to kind of like get to know her a little bit to an extent, like try to like get it through our minds that like this isn't Sam Puckett, this is Jennette McCurdy. Sam Puckett is a character and Jennette is an actual person. And I already like knew this before, so it didn't really like take me that much to like separate the art from the artist. But like for a lot of people, I feel like listening to the podcast Hard Feelings I feel like it would definitely like it definitely like let it sink into their heads that like this is a real person, and Jennette's journey of like recovery is like it's like a up and down process, seeing her share her own thoughts and feelings, like that was going on in her own life currently and then like in the past. It was a pretty good like show. And she did her last episode last year in January, where she was talking about how like she wished she was like she stood up for herself more during like an uncomfortable interaction with someone she knew. Let's segue into this sort of messy and juicy, I guess, her romantic relationships. I felt like I should add this in because it's a deep dive of her life, but to not like get too like invasive, we'll keep it brief. Jennette's love life was sort of documented by the media to an extent, but she kind of like delved a little bit more deeper in her book, obviously. Like only the relationships that had some sort of significance she wrote about. And since she grew up Mormon with an overbearing mother, it's safe to say she was very like sheltered. The way she like wrote about it's pretty obvious she was very like sheltered from like romance and intimacy when she like reached her like teens. Her first boyfriend was a man named Joe who worked behind the scenes of iCarly. He was older than her and he already had a girlfriend. And the relationship started off as basically an affair. It wasn't really like the best relationship. I feel like that man was pretty much a creep, and he just wasn't good for her. Even the way she wrote this, there was a scene in that book where they did like spend the night together, and that whole time it just felt off. Like, I don't know, like that man just gives me so many it gives so much like sketchy vibes. Obviously, since it started off as an affair, it wasn't really gonna last. She also dated, at the time, she dated this basketball player, Andre Drummer, for a week, and then he leaked her photos. I honestly don't even know if that relationship was even real or not. I don't really remember. Like, this was like in 2014, and I watched Sam and Cat a little bit at the time, but like I don't remember like anything. I never really like followed news, like celebrity news in the past growing up, but like it seemed like so insignificant, but like so significant at the same time because of like, unfortunately, the man like leaked her stuff. But obviously like, he wasn't mentioned in the book for like obvious reasons. Maybe she just didn't want to like talk about it. Well, obviously she didn't want to talk about it anyway. And then finally, like, she wrote about her relationship with a guy named Steven who worked behind the scenes on her Netflix show. And they dated for a while. And he even encouraged her to go to therapy for bulimia, but like unfortunately the relationship started like hit a very like rough patch when he started thinking he was Jesus Christ. And it was later found out that he had schizophrenia. And when she started to get better, he wasn't getting better. And they just started like drifting apart, and they just simply parted ways. And nowadays, I think Jennette says she's in a relationship now, and she's doing fine in her love life. We're gonna be now talking about childhood stardom, or child stardom, and how we view child stars in general. So we often view child stardom to be the ultimate dream, because of the fact that we think that they live glamorous lives and they have lots of freedom and money, like I've said in the last episode, and to piggyback off of this, because we think they're cool and they're so like hot, and like we just want to be friends with them, we want to date them. And the reality is, like, a lot of the times those famous child stars are dealing with a lot of things. Number one being like very predatory people in Hollywood, and also stage parents using them as cash cows. There are many child stars who have gone through both of those things at the same time. There are many child stars who have been tortured in the industry, especially going through those two things. The public's relationship with the child star is is very toxic and creepy, especially like when the stars like grow up, because obviously they will. People won't accept the fact that they're getting older and will sexualize and project an already adult image on them from a young age because of the industry that they work in. But the fact that they're acting as their own person on their own free will is like uncomfortable, because society is not viewing them as a person but like an object. What I mean by that is like growing up, like I've said in the last episode, in the public eye is a very unique experience, but it's also extremely traumatic, especially if you're a child actress. When you're a child actor, your youth and likeness is being captured on screen forever for future generations to like view you during your younger years and even your awkward adolescent years, and it's all captured on screen. It's all there for people to like go back and look up and view and just see it. And that can be like uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. But like it's even more traumatic when it attracts people who only see you as like an object for like as a cash cow, or an object for at worst like sexual desire, because you're more exposed to like very predatory like people who use you for those two things. Also, you're facing a lot of like adultification. You're growing up very early at a young age, and also you're very stifled, and like at a young age, like the age you get famous at is the age you'll kind of like mentally like stay famous for. You mentally stay at forever, is what people would say. Like if you get famous at like 16, you'll forever mentally be 16. But at the same time, because of the industry that you work in, you're going to be treated as like an adult, like through and through. You're making a lot of like adult decisions. You're managing a lot of people who make money off of you, agents, your lawyers. Who else? You're taking care of your family, most likely, because they're now relying on you for money. You're writing checks, you're paying bills. So like you're doing all this stuff, these adult things, and also you're looking online, or you're seeing tabloids of like paparazzi following you every single where you go, taking pictures of you like at the mall. They're taking pictures of you like at the grocery store. They're taking a picture of you like, I don't know, like at the beach, and they're like printing it out like in magazines, or like, you know, cheesy magazines. Or you're growing up on like in today's day and age, or like you feel like you're out in public and you can feel like a fan like noticing you and like taking pictures of you without you like looking and seeing them, but you know that they're taking pictures of you. Or like making like thirst trap edits of you like online. The media like sexualizing you like so much, and like it gets very frustrating. Like you're not really like seen as a person anymore because of how we view celebrity culture. We view them as like different people, so different from us that we think it's okay to treat them very differently. And when you're a child star, you get that 10 times, like it's like that, but it's like 10 times even worse. Let's say you're 18 years old and you're out all night at a party with your friends, and you're just a little bit drunk. And worse comes to worse, you're obviously like being filmed by like a fan, or like the paparazzi like takes pictures of you out at a club or at your friend's house like partying, and then you see people online judging you, like saying so many like hurtful things, saying that they're so irresponsible, they need to like act their own age. Or like you want to like feel like confident and like sexy, and you wear something that's like a little bit mature for your own age, or like just as mature as your age can be, or you're already like, you grew up in the industry for years and you're now like 21 and you wear like an off the shoulder like dress if you're like a girl, or like you wear dresses. You wear something that's a little bit like classic, like tasteful, revealing, and then people will go nuts and say how you're just doing this for attention. You need to like, this is so inappropriate. But not too long ago, when you were a minor, they were counting down the days until you were 18 and were already like touching themselves to their pictures of you already. The pendulum just keeps swinging. The worst part is we expect them to just simply grow up and like be well-adjusted adults. And that's like the biggest punch in the face of it all. To kind of just like close out my thoughts on this, because this was like a mini rant. My own personal thoughts on Jennette. I never really like watched iCarly that much, really. But I did watch a good bit of Sam and Cat to know who she is and like what she contributed to my childhood, to my sister's childhood most of all, and then many other childhoods of millennials and Gen Z. And like, the thing is, like, I never really like felt that attached to her. I never really like felt attached to Sam as much as like the super fan. And obviously, like, now that I've read her book like 2 years ago, I was not really like surprised when Jennette is like a different person from Sam, because obviously she is. And then like obviously like in interviews it does surprise me how different she is, because like we don't really see her that much. We don't really like watch her in interviews really, or we haven't really like seen her on screen when she did those interviews like in years. So we're all like a lot of the public is still like seeing her like and viewing her as Sam, and that kind of like, I think that still to this day kind of like irks her the most. Obviously, like, Jennette is her own person and she does want to be seen as such. And whenever I hear her talk about her struggles of trying to not being so effective being perceived as Sam sometimes, but like it does get to her, and it's understandable that it does get to her, because like she still works in this industry. She's just simply behind the scenes. She's just now a full-time writer. She's like a filmmaker now, and even when she goes out in public, people will sometimes like just simply see her and say, Sam, like, got your chicken, or like barsock, whatever. And it does like irk her a lot, because it represents a part of her life where she was going through so much pain. But it is a blessing that she is in a better place in her life, and she's still trying to like learn and better herself. But like, I never saw her as Sam Puckett. I know Sam Puckett is just a character. I know that Jennette McCurdy is a very real person. She's still like healing. She's a great actress. Even though she's not acting anymore, I still think you're a good actress, Jennette. She's a brilliant writer. And I look forward to like what she has working on in the future. And she's actually like, it was actually like announced that like she was like releasing like an Apple TV like mini series of her book, and Jennifer Aniston is going to be playing her mom, and Jennette's like heavily involved behind the scenes. She's going to be like directing too, and that's pretty good. And I think she's writing like another book. I think that's also what she's doing too, because she was like she's I think by the time I'm recording this, she's been like teasing something on her Instagram, and I don't know what it is. I feel like it's a new book. But like, I wonder what genre of like books she's gonna be like writing after her memoir, because she is a good writer. I will like, she is a great writer. I'm thinking like mystery, probably. That's kind of all I have for today. This has been like Jennette McCurdy's deep dive. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Let's discuss. You can find the podcast on Spotify and YouTube. If you want to like watch both on YouTube, just search up, I think, Nick Marshall on YouTube, but I might change it to like Let's Discuss Podcast for YouTube. You can find it on like anywhere you stream podcasts. You can find it on like you can follow it on social media, on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Discuss Podcast _ lowercase. And you can follow me, Nick.Marshall02, all lowercase. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just simply like, comment, and subscribe if you need to. If you want to. It'll be nice to have you if you liked what you've heard so far, if you made this far. And I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day, week, month, year. And I'll talk to you next time. Pretty soon. Anyway, we'll talk later. Alright. Bye.